The chamber was vast, an architectural marvel where ancient craftsmanship met cutting-edge technology. Each senator's seat rose in concentric tiers, creating a cascading amphitheater of authority. The domed ceiling shimmered with holographic projections of galactic constellations, their light dancing faintly against the polished stone walls. At the center, where all focus converged, stood a single podium. A podium which today belonged to me. I adjusted my posture, straightening my back as much as my 78 years allowed. The simple gray suit I wore bore no insignia beyond the Terran Union crest, a deliberate choice. Humanity needed no ostentation today. Our words would suffice. I could feel their eyes on me, hundreds of them from every corner of the galaxy. The Zalkar with their golden-hued scales and luminous eyes, the towering Karvath, whose broad, furred frames barely fit their seats, the translucent-fleshed Opticans, their eyeless faces perpetually unreadable, and, of course, the lithe and feline Senator Vilka Rehnquist, her predatory gaze fixed on me from across the room, as if waiting for me to falter. I gripped the edge of the podium, leaning slightly forward. The room fell silent. The quiet hum of the Senate's grav lifts and translator systems now the only sound. "Esteemed Senators," I began. My voice carried through the chamber with the aid of unseen amplifiers. "I stand before you today as a representative of humanity, a species that, not so long ago, gazed at the stars with awe and wonder, dreaming of our place among them." I paused, only briefly, to let the words settle. "When we first joined this august body, we were an enigma to many of you, a late arrival to the galactic stage, a fledgling species, untested and inexperienced. I am proud to say we've proven those assumptions wrong." There were murmurs among the delegates at this. Vilka's lips curled into a slight smirk. "But," I continued, "I come here today not to celebrate our achievements, but to sound an alarm. The galaxy stands at a crossroads. The alliances that have kept us united grow fragile. Trade routes that once flourished now suffer from raids and piracy. Conflicts simmer in the shadows, waiting to erupt." My gaze swept the room, lingering on those senators whose factions had played no small part in that instability. I saw shifting postures and exchanged glances, small tells that my words had struck a nerve. "And yet," I said, softening my tone, "this body has the power to avert catastrophe, to lead as it is meant to, toward peace and prosperity. But doing so requires courage and unity, qualities that seem in short supply these days." Vilka stood abruptly, her chair retracting with a hiss. The murmurs of the chamber grew louder. "Ambassador Calum," she said, her voice sharp contrast to my more measured cadence. "Your words are eloquent, as always, but one cannot help but wonder if your speech serves as a prelude to yet another Terran demand for power." Laughter rippled through a few corners of the chamber. Vilka's influence ran deep. I met her gaze unflinchingly as I gave retort. "Senator Rehnquist, while I appreciate your candor, let me assure you, humanity's interest is not in power but survival, ours and yours. And that is why I must share with this body a discovery of great importance." The room stilled once more. Vilka hesitated and then, slowly, resumed her seat. "On a long-abandoned colony world," I said, choosing my words carefully, "our scientists uncovered remnants of technology unlike anything we have encountered before. Ancient, powerful, and perilously intact." The constellations which normally decorate the ceiling of the Senate chambers shifted, replaced by holograms of the artifacts in question. Massive, gleaming constructs of unknown alloys, etched with intricate patterns that seemed almost alive. Gasps echoed through the chamber. "This technology," I continued, "predates the oldest civilizations represented here. It is capable of creating or destroying entire worlds, and it was found on a human colony. I allowed the weight of my statement to sink in. You lie! Vilka's voice sliced through the silence. This is a fabrication, a ploy to place humanity at the center of galactic affairs. I raised a hand, inviting calm even before Vilka's outburst could properly incite outrage. Senator Rehnquist, the artifacts have been independently verified by neutral researchers. The findings are irrefutable. Kale Dravik, seated in the shadows behind me, tapped a discrete communicator. Data streams appeared on the chamber's central display, corroborating my claims. Vilka's smirk then vanished, replaced by a venomous glare. This body must decide how to proceed, I said, addressing the entire Senate. The artifacts cannot be ignored. They represent both an opportunity and a threat. Humanity stands ready to collaborate with this body to ensure they are safeguarded for the benefit of all. A cacophony of voices erupted, some in support, others in outrage. But this time I stepped back, permitting the storm to rage. Kale approached, whispering to me just barely enough for me to hear over the cacophony. His expression and voice both were tight. Well, that went about as well as expected, he muttered. I allowed myself a faint smile. There are few sticks better at stirring a boiling stew pot than the truth. The session adjourned in chaos, delegates filing out in heated discussion. Kale and I retreated to a secure chamber where he activated a signal jammer. We've got a problem, he said. What kind? I replied, allowing a tinge of concern to infect my tone. Someone's trying to discredit you. I intercepted a coded transmission, mentions of fabricated evidence, a staged scandal, and... He hesitated. An assassin plot. I met his gaze, my expression unchanging. The Senate bombing. He nodded. It's possible. There's more, though. Vilka's name came up. I closed my eyes briefly, the weight of years pressed upon my vocal cords more harshly now than ever before. Then we must act swiftly. Gather the evidence, Kale. If Vilka has ties to this conspiracy, I'll see her exposed. And the artifacts? He inquired. There are leverage, I said, but they'll mean nothing if the Senate collapses to infighting. Kale hesitated before nodding. I understand. The next day, as the Senate reconvened, I stood once more at the podium. The tension in the air was more tightly wound than a compressed suspension coil. I began. The galaxy is watching. The decision we make here will ripple throughout history. Let us ensure that they are remembered for their wisdom and not their folly. Vilka rose again, but this time her posture betrayed unease. Ambassador Calum, you speak of unity, yet your species has acted unilaterally in securing these artifacts. How can we trust your intentions? Trust, I replied, is earned through action. Allow us to demonstrate our commitment by working with this body to establish a neutral commission to oversee the artifacts. Humanity does not seek to hoard power, but to share responsibility. Vilka opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, the chamber was rocked by an explosion. The lights flickered, and the room filled with smoke. Kale was at my side in an instant, pulling me to safety as chaos erupted around us. Stay low, he barked, his voice cutting through the din. As the smoke cleared, I saw Vilka, standing amidst the wreckage, her expression unreadable. For a brief moment our eyes met, and I thought I saw fear. But of what? The explosion, certainly, but she was looking at me. In the days that followed, the Senate's fractures deepened. Yet amidst the chaos, a new urgency took hold. Humanity's revelations had lit a fire under the Senate, one that could either forge a stronger alliance or consume it entirely. I could only hope the words I had yet to speak would tilt the balance toward the former. The silence of the secure facility was broken only by the hum of medical equipment. I lay on a cot in the corner of the room, a thick blanket pulled over me. My chest ached from the explosion's shockwave, but the damage was minor, a testament to Kale's quick actions. "Elias!" Kale's voice came from the doorway. He was leaning against the frame, arms crossed, his expression grim. "You're lucky to be alive." I sat up, wincing as I adjusted my posture. "Luck had little to do with it. I assume you have news?" Kale stepped inside, closing the door behind him. His movements were stiff, controlled, as if he were holding something back. "The investigation into the bombing is underway. No public claims of responsibility yet, but the chatter I've intercepted suggests this wasn't an isolated act." I sighed, running a hand through my thinning hair. "Let me guess. Someone wants humanity out of the picture entirely." He nodded. "And they're willing to do whatever it takes. I've identified a network of communications pointing to a shadow faction within the Senate, likely connected to Senator Vilka Rehnquist. They're using coded transmissions and encrypted nodes, but the patterns are clear." "Sabotage, assassination, and propaganda," I said softly. "The old playbook." Kale pulled a small device from his pocket, projecting a holographic map of the Senate's structure. Red points flared across the display, connected by thin, pulsing lines. He explained with clear concern, "This is their network. I've tracked these points to suspected safe houses, communications hubs, and hidden assets. It's extensive, Elias. They've been planning this for years." I studied the map. My mind raced. And yet they've now revealed their hand. The bombing was premature. Desperation. Kale grimaced. "Desperate or not, they nearly killed you. And they've already begun turning public opinion against us. Vilka is leading the charge, spreading rumors that the artifacts are a Terran power grab." I clenched my fists. "We can't let her win. If we lose the Senate's trust, the consequences will be catastrophic. Not just for humanity, but for the galaxy." Kale leaned closer, his voice low. "And we will fight back. But we'll need evidence. Concrete proof that Vilka and her allies orchestrated this attack." I nodded in affirmation. "And we'll need to rally our allies. Tarvek may be our best chance." Later that day, I met with Senator Tarvek Lernis in a private alcove within the Senate's sprawling complex. The Sarnid senator's silver scales glinted under the soft glow of the room's biolights, his serpentine form coiled in a position of cautious interest. "Ambassador Calum," he said, his voice smooth and melodic. "You've certainly stirred the pot. The chamber is in uproar, and forgive my grim humor, but the energy at the last convention was volatile." "I'm aware," I replied, taking a seat across from him, but not a dim tone despite his somewhat inappropriate joke. "That's why I need your help." Tarvek tilted his head, his emerald eyes narrowing. "You assume I'm willing to risk my position for humanity's cause." "You're willing to risk it for stability," I countered. "Vilka's faction is destabilizing the Senate, and if they succeed, the consequences will be felt across the galaxy. You've seen what they're capable of." Tarvek was silent for a moment, his gaze unwavering. Then he leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "What do you need?" "Your support on the council floor," I said. "But more importantly, I need you to help us uncover the truth. Vilka and her allies must be exposed." Tarvek considered this, his tongue flicking briefly. "You ask much, Ambassador. If Vilka suspects my involvement, my position and my people could suffer." "And if Vilka's plans succeed, your people will suffer regardless," I replied. "This is our only chance to stop her, but we can't do it alone." Tarvek's gaze softened, and after a long pause, he nodded. Very well. But understand this. If we fail, the Sonnet will not stand with you again. We won't fail, I promised. The next Senate session was a storm of accusations and counterclaims. Vilka took the floor early, her voice dripping with disdain as she denounced humanity's actions. Ambassador Calum speaks of unity, she declared, her sharp features illuminated by the chamber's lights. Yet his species has acted first in claiming and collecting technology that could pose a threat to every civilization represented here, before bringing it to the Senate's attention. Her words drew murmurs of agreement from her supporters. I waited, letting her rhetoric build so that the punch of my counter would hit harder. When she was finished and it was my turn to speak, I rose slowly, letting the silence stretch. The room was tense, the senators watching me with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. Esteemed senators, I began, my voice steady but firm, let us not be swayed by fear and speculation. Humanity has acted in good faith, seeking only to protect the artifacts until this body can determine their fate. But let me ask you this. Who benefits from sowing division within this chamber? The murmurs grew louder, and I saw Vilka shift uncomfortably in her seat. Consider the timing of recent events, I continued. The explosion that nearly claimed my life, and the lives of many of you, was not an act of chance or a crazed individual. It was a deliberate attempt to disrupt our unity. And who has gained the most from this chaos? I let the question hang, my gaze sweeping the room, but all the other gazes turn in a single direction. Truly, that Sarnid works quickly. Vilka stood abruptly. These accusations are baseless, she snapped. You seek to deflect attention from your own misdeeds. Then let the evidence speak for itself, I replied calmly. I have here intercepted communications linking the perpetrators of the bombing to a faction within this very chamber. These transmissions will be made available to all senators for review. Kale, seated in the shadows, activated a display, projecting fragments of the decoded messages onto the central hollow table. Gasps and whispers rippled through the chamber as the connections became clear. Vilka's expression darkened, her composure cracking. This is an outrage, she spat. Fabrications! Lies! Then prove your innocence, I said, my voice cutting through the noise. The truth will prevail, Senator. The remainder of the session turned into a cavalcade of back-and-forth arguments between Vilka, those of her faction, and those already aligned with humanity, all vying for the ears of the majority-neutral senators. After the session, Kale and I returned to our secure quarters. He was unusually quiet, his brow furrowed as he reviewed the data feeds. We've rattled her, I said, breaking the silence. Kale glanced at me, his expression unreadable. She won't go down without a fight, and neither will her allies. I know, I replied, but we've taken the first step. Now we need to keep the pressure on. Kale hesitated, then leaned forward, his voice low. Elias, there's something else. I've intercepted another transmission. They're planning to move against you directly. Another assassination attempt. I met his gaze, my expression grim. Let them come. I've faced worse. Kale shook his head. This isn't just about you. They'll target anyone who stands with us. Tarvek, the moderates, even civilians if it suits their agenda. Then we protect them, I said firmly. And we make sure the Senate knows who's responsible. That night, as I prepared for the next day's session, I found myself staring at my reflection in the mirror. The lines on my face seemed deeper, the weight of the past few weeks etched into my features. For a moment, doubt crept in. Had I done enough? Could humanity survive the storm I had unleashed? But then I thought of Kale, of Tarvek, of the millions, billions of lives depending on us, and I knew there was no turning back. The blackened remnants of the Senate bombing still scarred the chamber. While the structure had been hastily repaired, the air was thick with unease, an invisible reminder of the fragility of galactic unity. Delegates filed into the chamber with wary glances, their ranks visibly thinner. Some senators, fearing further attacks, had fled the capital altogether. As I approached the podium, Kale Dravik shadowed me. He'd barely left my side since the first attempt, his watchful eyes scanning every corner of the room. Tarvek Lernus had taken a seat close to the center, his serpentine frame coiled in a position of readiness. Kale leaned closer. "Security's tighter today, but don't trust it. I've already picked out 3 weak points in the perimeter." I smirked faintly. "Noted. Any sign of Vilka?" "She's here," he muttered, gesturing subtly to the far left quadrant, looking smug as ever. With an eyebrow raised, I observe, "She thinks she's won." "Prove her wrong," Kale said grimly. As I took the podium again, the chamber dimmed, and the hollow screens lit up, amplifying my image for all to see. I allowed the room to quiet, each second seeming to stretch longer than an Archimedean lever. "Esteemed senators," I began, my voice calm but forceful, "the events of the past weeks have tested this body, revealing fractures we can no longer ignore. But remember that amidst this chaos, occluded by the seemingly endless attempts at disruption, humanity has uncovered something of greater consequence. Something that could determine not just our survival, but the survival of the galaxy itself." The hologram behind me shifted to display an image of the ancient artifacts. Massive constructs of alien metal shimmered in hues of bronze and green, etched with glowing symbols that pulsed faintly, as if alive. "These artifacts," I continued, "though discovered on a human colony, are not of our creation. They predate any known civilization. Their power, if unleashed, could reshape the galaxy or destroy it." The murmurs began immediately, rippling through the room like a wave as each senator recalled my words in the first meeting. It seemed so long ago, and recent events had made them all too easy to forget. "And yet," I said, raising my voice to cut through the noise, "instead of uniting to address this threat, factions within this chamber sought to divide us further. I ask you, will we allow fear and mistrust to guide us, or will we rise to meet this challenge together?" Vilka Renqueth stood, her golden eyes blazing. "Ambassador Calum, your words are clever, but they mask your true intent. Humanity seeks to hoard this power, to wield it for its own gain." She insists on repeating the same accusatory rhetoric that she already has each time before. It's getting old, and that's rich, coming from me. I turn to face her, unflinching. "Senator Renqueth, I have already proposed the formation of a neutral oversight committee to study and safeguard the artifacts. Humanity has no desire to act unilaterally. If we truly wish to hoard them, why would we even bother informing this body of them? If you would stop making bold and baseless accusations, you would see clearly that humanity has only the galaxy's best interest in heart. Can you say the same?" Her lips curled into a sneer, but she did not respond. Tarvek stood next, his voice smooth and deliberate. "Ambassador Calum raises a valid point. The artifacts represent both an opportunity and a danger. But I would caution against rash action. We must proceed with care, lest we unleash forces we cannot control. Study rather than exploit." His measured words seemed to sway some of the delegates, but those of Vilka's faction remained visibly defiant. After another long session of empty rhetoric and eventual shouting, Kale pulled me aside once again, and I begin to feel as if I am stuck in a time loop. Thankfully, the number of voices shouting in favor of humanity's neutral committee have been growing with each convention, despite Vilka's best attempts. His expression was, as expected, grim. New intel. Vilka's no longer content with stirring up trouble in the chamber. She's sending agents to the colony where the artifacts were found. Now I am truly worried. What's her goal? She wants to frame humanity, he said. Plant evidence that we've been experimenting with the artifacts in secret, then use it to turn the Senate against us. My jaw tightened. We can't let that happen. What's the status of the colony? Understaffed and poorly defended, Kale admitted. If Vilka's agents hit it, they'll have the run of the place. Then we'll need to go ourselves, I said. If the artifacts are as dangerous as we suspect, we can't risk them falling into the wrong hands. Kale frowned. It's a trap, Elias. She's baiting you. Perhaps, I replied. But if we do nothing, we lose anyway. The journey to the colony was uneventful, though thankfully the Terran Union's diplomatic cruiser cut through hyperspace with smooth precision. Kale and I were joined by a small team of trusted operatives, their faces almost as grim as Kale's as they prepared for what lay ahead, and only half as stoic. The colony itself was a bleak outpost on the edge of a barren world, its domed structures battered by relentless winds. The artifact site lay beneath the surface, accessible only through a reinforced shaft that descended into the planet's crust. As we entered the facility, the air grew colder. The faint hum of machinery began to reverberate through the narrow corridors. At the heart of the chamber lay the artifacts. Their alien forms radiated an almost imperceptible energy. Kale's team spread out, securing the perimeter, while I approached the artifacts. Tarvek, who had insisted on accompanying us, moved beside me. They are magnificent, he said softly, his emerald eyes wide with awe. And dangerous, I replied. We must ensure they are never misused. Kale's voice crackled over the comms. We've got movement topside. Multiple contacts inbound, heavily armed. Vilka's agents? I asked. Most likely. They'll be here in minutes. The earpiece sputtered and then cut. I turned to Tarvek. Can you rally your allies in the Senate if this goes public? He hesitated, then nodded. I will try, but you'll need proof. Kale's voice cut in again. Elias, we've got a bigger problem. The artifacts are waking up. I spun around to see the constructs had begun to glow brighter, their etched symbols now pulsing in a rapid, erratic pattern. The air grew charged, and a low vibration filled the chamber. What's causing it? I asked. No idea, Kale replied, his tone sharp, but we need to shut it down before it blows this place to hell. I stepped closer to the artifacts, my heart pounding. There must be a control mechanism. Tarvek hissed in alarm. Be careful, Ambassador. We don't know what these are. Before I could respond, the chamber was filled with the deafening roar of gunfire echoing from the hallways behind the elevator shaft above. Vilka's agents had breached the facility, their weapons blazing as they stormed through the corridors. Returning cracks attempted to split my aged ears as Kale and his team engaged them. I ducked behind a console, my mind racing. I desperately called into the earpiece, almost shouting over the gunfire. Kale, we need more time! Work faster, he growled, his voice strained. I turned to the artifacts, searching for any clue to their function. My fingers brushed against one of the glowing symbols, and the entire chamber lit up. A voice echoed through the space, deep and resonant, speaking in a language I couldn't understand. The artifacts began to shift, their forms reconfiguring into something more menacing. Elias, what did you do? Kale shouted. I don't know, I replied as panic crept into my voice. The vibrations grew stronger, and a beam of light shot upward from the artifacts, piercing the ceiling and continuing into the now unveiled sky. Kale's voice came over the comms again. Whatever you triggered, it's broadcasting something. We're picking up signals across the spectrum. It's traveling orders of magnitude faster than light. It's intergalactic. My blood ran cold. If the artifacts were sending a signal, it could draw attention from every single faction in the galaxy, even those far beyond the borders of the civilizations which have joined the Galactic Senate. And not all of them would come in peace, not to mention the potential for things outside the galaxy, if it truly is as Kale says. We need to shut it down, I said, immediately regretting my hasty actions. Tarvek approached cautiously. Let me help. As it so happens, my people have also studied ancient artifacts. though not ones nearly so intact. Perhaps together we can stabilize it." I nodded, stepping aside to let him examine the artifacts. He muttered to himself in his native tongue, his hands moving with uncertainty, but not imprecision. Miraculously, the vibrations began to subside, and the symbols dimmed until, eventually, the artifacts returned to their dormant state. Kale's voice crackled over the comms. "The agents are retreating. Looks like they didn't expect that broadcast." I exhaled slowly, the weight of the moment settling over me. "Tarvek, you've done us a great service." He straightened, his expression unreadable. "This is far from over, Ambassador. Now even the darkest corners of the universe have heard that signal, and they will come." The Galactic Senate chamber was alive with tension. Delegates whispered in hushed tones, their faces marked by unease. The signal from the artifacts had spread far and wide, reaching not only the factions within the Senate, but also the hidden powers of the galaxy. Rumors of ancient technology capable of reshaping entire civilizations had sparked fear, ambition, and desperation in equal measure. Kale Dravik stood beside me in the antechamber, his hand resting lightly on the grip of his sidearm. He scanned the room, his sharp eyes catching every suspicious movement. "They're all here," he muttered. "Every senator who could make it. Even Vilka Renquith's camp looks rattled." I nodded, adjusting the simple pin on the Terran Union crest on my lapel. "They should be. This is bigger than any of us." Kale's lips tightened. "The message from the artifacts, whatever it said, has thrown the galaxy into chaos. You're about to walk into a den of predators, Elias. Be ready." I straightened my shoulders, feeling the weight of my years settle over me. My body was old, but my purpose was sharp. Let's hope words are enough to tame them. The chamber was packed to capacity, every senator present and accounted for. The holographic projection of the artifact signal hovered above the central dais, a swirling lattice of light and symbols that defied easy comprehension. It cast an eerie glow over the delegates, their faces turned upward in fascination and dread. I stepped to the podium, my footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. The murmurs ceased, replaced by an expectant hush. The galaxy was watching. "Esteemed senators," I began, my voice amplified to carry across the chamber, "we stand still at a crossroads, one that will determine the fate of not just this Senate, but of every world, every civilization, every being across the stars." I gestured to the projection above. "The artifacts we discovered, remnants of a civilization long gone, have spoken to us. Their message is clear. We are being judged." The room erupted in noise, senators shouting over one another in alarm and confusion. I raised a hand, and the amplifiers adjusted, letting my voice cut through the din. "Let us not delude ourselves," I said. "The signal has drawn attention from forces beyond our understanding, but it is not too late to act. We can choose how to respond, to unite or to fracture further into chaos." Vilka Renquith rose from her seat, her golden eyes blazing. "Ambassador Calum, your rhetoric is as grandiose as ever, but you have yet to answer the question on all our minds. What gives humanity the right to speak for the galaxy in this matter?" I turned to her, meeting her gaze without flinching. "I do not claim the right, Senator, but humanity has borne the weight of these artifacts since their discovery, so far alone for the Senate's hesitation in establishing a neutral committee. And it is humanity's willingness to share that burden that brings us here today." Her expression hardened, but she did not interrupt again. I continued. "The artifacts are more than relics broadcasting some signal. They are a mirror, reflecting our strengths and flaws. They have shown us the power we hold, and the consequences of wielding it carelessly are soon to come. If we fail to unite, we risk repeating the mistakes of the civilizations that came before us. Civilizations that are now little more than whispers in the void." The room was silent now, every eye fixed on me. I stepped closer to the edge of the podium, my voice softening. Some of you fear what these artifacts represent. Others see them as an opportunity. But I tell you this, their true purpose is to test us, to see if we are worthy of the galaxy we have inherited. As I spoke, Kale moved through the shadows of the chamber, his gaze darting between delegates. He caught sight of a subtle movement in Vilka's section, an aide passing a datapad to one of her allies. His earpiece crackled softly, a reptilian voice coming through quietly. Kale, you've got something? I don't like this, he muttered. Vilka's making a move. Be ready, Tarvek Lernus' voice replied. The Sarnid senator had taken a calculated risk in supporting us, and his presence on the security feed was a comfort. Kale continued his sweep, his instincts prickling. I reached the crescendo of my speech, my hands gripping the edges of the podium. This is our moment to rise above petty squabbles and divisions. Let us prove that we are more than our fears, more than our ambitions. Let us show the galaxy and the artifacts that we are capable of unity. I paused, letting the gravity of my words slowly draw in the ears of my audience. To that end, I now propose the formation of a Galactic Oversight Commission, composed of representatives from every faction, to study and safeguard the artifacts. This commission will operate independently of any single government, ensuring that the artifacts are neither weaponized nor exploited. The chamber erupted again, but this time the voices were not of fear, but debate. Kale's voice sparked through my earpiece. Movement. Armed figures near the east entrance. They are annoyingly persistent. Tarvek's voice was sharp. They're not Senate security. They're Vilka's agents. Kale moved swiftly, his sidearm drawn. He intercepted the figures just as they entered the chamber, his weapon trained on the leader. This is a restricted area, he said coldly. Stand down. The leader hesitated, then raised his weapon. Kale fired first, the stun round dropping the agent instantly. The others scrambled, but Tarvek's own security team was well prepared and moved in, neutralizing the threat before any serious gunfighting broke out. Kale's voice crackled through the comms. Threat contained. Proceed. The chamber settled as the debates grew more measured. It seemed hardly anyone even noticed the disturbance. I could see alliances forming, the beginning of consensus. Even Vilka sensed the tide turning, her expression shifting from defiance to calculation. Finally, the Speaker of the Senate called for a vote. One by one, the factions cast their decisions. When the tally was complete, the results were displayed on the central hologram. The commission was approved. Applause rippled through the chamber, hesitant at first, but growing in strength. As I left the podium, Kale met me in the corridor, his expression now not grim, but satisfied. You did it. We did it, I corrected, clapping a hand on his shoulder. Tarvek approached, his serpentine form gliding smoothly. A historic moment, Ambassador, but the work has only just begun. I nodded. The galaxy will judge us by what comes next. That night, as I stood on the balcony of the Terran embassy, the stars stretched out before me, vast and unknowable. The artifact's mysterious signal still lingered in my mind, a sign of the challenges ahead. But for the first time in weeks, I felt hope. The galaxy had taken a step toward unity, and perhaps, just perhaps, we had proven ourselves worthy of the stars.